Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Cardboard Herald, my chance to talk with creative gamers and game creators. And returning to the show is one of the guests that I had way back in the day, Andrew Russell Birkett. Welcome back to the show, man.
Thanks for having me back. It's been a little while, for sure.
Yeah, well, there have been significant changes. I mean, we've always had a little bit of Atheris on the show. You've been on a couple times. A couple people who have signed games with Atheris Entertainment have been on. But since I originally talked with you, I mean, let's see, you've switched from Atheris Games to Atheris Entertainment. You've gotten married, you've cut your significantly long hair and beard, you've had a baby, and you're making comic books, and suddenly you're making blankets? What's going on, man?
Yeah, definitely a lot has changed. Still doing the board games, but I definitely have always subscribed to an idea that I heard a lot in college, which is that the people who make the most money in a gold rush are the people selling picks and shovels.
Okay. That makes sense to me as an Alaskan, you know, getting the pick and shovel sourdough metaphor is, you know, that works for me. What doesn't work for me is what business does someone in Florida have knowing about blankets? You know, come on. Like, it's constantly like 100 degrees there. How can I trust you to be the person to usher in this new world of board game blankitude?
Well, of course, I had to send you one. I needed to make sure that someone in Alaska could utilize this blanket. We're making sure to have Sensitivity Alaska.
Yeah, exactly. That's market research right there.
Yeah, exactly. Would this work in a climate that's not 150 degrees?
You can't wrap a crocodile in this blanket, so, you know, you need to send it up here. So what is the impetus for this? Like, you contacted me and you were like, hey man, I'm working on my next Kickstarter. And I was like, oh cool, there's another follow-up. I mean, we already had an interview go up related to Ruins of Mars. You know, that Kickstarter went well and everything. And then I was like, oh, what's the next game? You're like, yo, they're blankets. And so, like, what was the kind of origin of this?
So I definitely always realized that I have too many games on the shelf behind me that I don't play, unfortunately, and I obviously COVID has made that more difficult to play all the games on my shelf. And so even prior to that, before the baby was born and whatnot, I was looking to kind of buy some board game related stuff, but I wasn't necessarily buying as many board games because I have a bunch of unopened games. I feel a little guilty with that, but I was like, I can justify buying board game related stuff like these dice tower coasters.
Yeah, there you go.
So I can buy that stuff. It's okay. I don't have unplayed coasters. But so I wanted to find a board game blanket for my living room, and I could not find anything. I was like, oh, I wonder if it doesn't exist because no one wants it. So I was like, I'm going to have one of my artists that I've worked with a lot in the past, Alan, or he did artwork for Cul-de-sac Conquest and for Supernatural Socks, and he's done a lot of other artwork for me as well. So I was like, hey, Alan, you want to design this blanket idea? I might never make it, but he was like, sure, why not? So I had him design it, and then went to a Chinese manufacturer and was like, hey, make me a sample, and then we'll see if anyone likes this thing. So I posted it in some of the Facebook groups, and it had like 200 comments. And I was like, okay, maybe this actually could be viable. A lot of people saying, take my money and all that kind of traditional, where the business end of me is like, oh, this actually could work. Maybe I should actually do this legitimately instead of just as a side project of I'm going to make one for my house kind of thing.
See, that is so true to you as I know you. I mean, at this point, we've known each other for close to 4 years, and I've always seen you as, like, the entrepreneur and the storyteller. Like, those are the two core elements that I identify with you. And just thinking about this as, hey, there is a need out there, there's a want, and therefore I'm going to fulfill it, that just seems to make so much sense. What I want to know is the story half of it. You know, you have this blanket. How did you come up with this character? Was this just the the artist came up with the design for generic white dad bod board gamer dude, or was this a little bit more thought going into it? Because I couldn't tell if I felt honored that the person on the blanket kind of looked like me and a good portion of the board gaming audience, or a little attacked.
Well, so kind of a little bit of both. So the original design impetus, the first blanket that we're kind of launching with, is all personified game components. So I wanted to have something gaming specific that, you know, all gamers would kind of recognize, but I didn't want it to be something where it would clue people into one game or another. And I was having Alan do that design, and like I said, since he's worked with us on other projects, he always likes to add like little tiny homages to Atheris. So there's like a little snake in his design, but the majority of it is like, you know, personified pawns and all that kind of stuff. So that was the first design we did, and that was the first one that went in those Facebook groups and people started liking. And I wanted to the original plan was, I was like, okay, people like this blanket. I'm going to go and make a Kickstarter for board game merchandise, and I'm going to start this whole merchandise company. And then I was like, oh, that's a lot of logistical stuff that I probably should focus on one thing. That the whole idea was the blanket. That's the main thing for the Kickstarter. Maybe I can tune out some of the other stuff and maybe add stretch goals that we can add add-ons for t-shirts and socks. I made board game socks and had them manufactured recently for like samples and whatnot. And they're actually pretty cool. So I'm probably going to do that at some point. So it's like going to be an add-on for the Kickstarter, but the main goal is for board game blankets. So then I have multiple designs. So the second design I started working with an artist that's redoing some of our branding. So we're redoing our website to incorporate more e-commerce. Obviously, as people know, COVID changed a lot of businesses, and so we lost a major sales channel and conventions, and then retailers have been hit really hard, and that means that they are less likely to purchase something from someone like us, being a small publisher. So our retail sales for Ruins of Mars were significantly lower than what they probably would have been prior to COVID. And so obviously that hurts a smaller business like ours. And so we're trying to figure out different sales channels that we can kind of adapt into. And so I had never done much with e-commerce on our website. Our website was kind of static and honestly needed some work anyways. So we're trying to do more brand development and whatnot. And so I had the artist that was going to do the website. I wanted to see kind of his graphic design skills before paying him a little bit more money for the full website development and whatnot. So I had him start by making one of the blanket designs, and it seemed like he based it on me. It was like had similar hair and a beard, and I was like, oh, this is funny. But I didn't give him really like any feedback, honestly. So for the design, I was just like, I want a board game blanket. It needs to be board game related. That's it. Go with it. And he presented me 3 designs, and they were all pretty cool. So the one was like board games kind of being like part of our blood, and so it was a meeple, and then all the veins and stuff were different components. I thought that was cool, but could have been maybe implemented a little better. So I had him convert it to just a hand so that it's smaller and it's more understandable what that is. But I felt like that design was better for like a sticker or something, so I'm going to use that for something else. And then he had a design that's like, today I pillage a village and all the kind of typical board game things that you do. And then it says board games are my happy place. And so I liked that and was like, that would make a really cool t-shirt. So if this Kickstarter does really well, that's going to be a t-shirt that we offer. But the Zen meditation guy related most to me. I was like, I would buy a blanket with that, particularly because the guy does look like me. But then, of course, being that a lot of board gamers are like me, straight white males, I didn't want that to be everything. So one of the things that I had always, when the original plan was to make a merchandise company, I talked to an artist we had worked with for one of the promo characters for Ruins of Mars, Tatiana Quigley. She did the super mutant card for Ruins of Mars, and she did awesome with it. So I asked her if she would want to make a t-shirt design, basically talking about inclusivity in board games, and basically showcasing everyone's welcome at our table. It was the kind of design premise. And she was going to do it and then got too busy. And so then it just kind of like slowly fell off. And then now that I'm doing the blankets and more focused on that, I kind of did a call to action to find minority graphic designers and artists to make a design for our board game blankets that encompass all of the things that we want in board games to be more inclusive and more accepting of all people, no matter what, you know, their sexual preferences are or what race they are or any of that kind of stuff. Does not matter for playing board games, so no one should care. But of course, I posted it in one of the art and graphic design groups and instantly was hated by every straight white male in the group.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, no one should care. In fact, well, people should care. They should care that this is a worthy cause to pursue, to, you know, be inclusive. But in 2020, it turns out that saying, you know, that you want to be inclusive or denouncing white supremacist groups is a controversial thing somehow. It's a strange, very strange world we live in.
Unfortunately, very, very sad, but I kind of knew from the get-go that if I could have had Peter, the guy who did the Zen Master artwork, make another design, and honestly, Peter's been one of the best artists I've ever worked with in terms of communication and getting quality designs quickly, and so I definitely would love to work with him on other projects, and like I said, I'm working with him on the website and stuff, but I felt like the main purpose of the blanket was to highlight minority creators and getting a graphic designer artist that is part of one of those minorities that doesn't have as many opportunities would better showcase what the whole idea of being inclusive in board gaming is about. And then, like I said, instantly was hated on by like every straight white male in the group. I was like, I'm not trying to do anything wrong here. I'm literally just trying to help highlight minority voices in board gaming, which should be totally not controversial at all.
You know, see, what's so strange about this to me is that, in particular, in this hobby, it should be the great unifier, right? You know, this is, by design, most games want more people. You want more players. Like, how often do you see so much discussion online about, like, oh, I don't have someone to play this game, or, you know, I don't have enough people who are interested in the games that I'm playing, or, you know, my game group only likes this type of game, they don't like this type of game. You know, the more that we find ways of bringing people into this hobby to feel welcome into this hobby, then the more diverse groups of people there are that may be interested in all these games who might have otherwise been turned off by this hobby because it feels insular and kind of made for a certain sector of population. So to me, the being inclusive is not just like morally the right thing to do, but there's like a selfish impetus to it as well. You know, I want there to be more board gamers. I want to see more games from different perspectives so that I can play them, because I don't want to play the same thing over again. Just like with comic books or movies or, you know, any number of things. Sure, I like the stuff that's been done in the past, but that doesn't mean that I don't want to see new and different things in the future, and that we can find ways of having that as a society. So I don't know. That's a really strange thing to me. But like I said, 2020, I guess, you know, let's say since 2016, there's been somewhat of a reckoning, a realization that a lot of people have had in America that, you know, maybe hard-earned progress isn't as permanent as we thought, and wasn't as, I guess, expansive as we thought. So I guess, you know, that learn from our own naivety and make efforts like you're doing right now. But to get into less dire terms, let's talk about the Kickstarter itself. You know, you've kickstarted lots of games in the past. You've done lots of consultation on Kickstarters. What are some of the logistical things that you weren't necessarily expecting as you started designing the Kickstarter plan for this that have cropped up as you draw near? I mean, this Kickstarter is hot to trot. It's ready to go here really soon.
Yeah, so the just like any other board games or anything, a lot of it is figuring out things that in theory you start off without knowing any idea about. When I started publishing board games, I had zero idea what it was like manufacturing a board game. I was like, I can't tell you what paper quality I need. I have no idea. You're gonna have to explain this to me. And so that's kind of how the blankets are too, is like I don't know what typical GSM's blankets are. And they're at, like, manufacturers ask me, and I'm like, I don't know whatever's normal. Please explain what you normally use, and then I'll pick from those options of whichever one's the best one. That's my go-to always. I always go for the highest quality within reason of, like, not going completely broke.
Right.
It's definitely a plan as a company, not going broke. And so that's been kind of trying to figure that out. And then I got our email recently from some of our freight partners, fulfillment end of things, and saying that with Brexit and a lot of the things happening in the EU, that VAT laws are changing, and that it could mean a substantial increase in pricing for VAT in Europe and the EU, and them being separate hubs, so that publishers like us would have to ship some games to the EU and some to the UK in order to be EU and UK friendly, and that we would have to pay VAT to each individual entity, so one to the EU and one to the UK. So that is kind of a new, changing, interesting thing that could potentially affect a lot of publishers. And even though the blankets are a little bit different, I'm kind of trying to bank off using the same kind of fulfillment companies that all board game companies tend to use, and kind of leverage the existing networks that I've already built up through Atheris gaming stuff.
So you got the gaming arm of Atheris, and now you have the warm, snuggly, fuzzy blanket arm of Atheris that you're working on. What about the fascination with comic books? Like, this isn't something that I saw as a cornerstone of Atheris when I first met you 4 years ago, but now it seems to be something that you're more and more interested in. I know you've done some fiction work in the past, but it seems to be that you're leaning more towards comic books and graphic novels. What got you into the comic biz? Is this something you got into in adulthood, or are you a fan of comics as a kid? And how does that fit into the whole Atheris picture?
Yeah, so I didn't read comics as much growing up, but I've always been into reading. I actually failed first grade because I had a reading disability, and so my mom had to read to me, and I got held back and had to go into all kinds of reading things, and they tried to teach me how to read faster, which was pretty ineffective. Then my comprehension just went down, and eventually I worked up, and I think like by like 5th grade, I had like a 12th grade reading level. It drastically changed after a few years. But I think that failing had kind of got me more interested in it. So I've always loved reading it and writing ever since then, I feel like. And so when I started Atheris, I wrote a story that was about annoying neighbors and then made a game about it. So it was always the story came first. Supernatural Socks was a story me and my brother used to joke that ghosts are stealing our socks all the time. And I was telling that story to my now wife and was like, oh, that would actually make a cool game. I should try that. And then like a day later, I had the core idea of Supernatural Socks. I prototyped it on the ride from Gainesville, where I was living, to Orlando, which is a 2-hour drive, and I had the whole thing done by the end of the 2 hours, and then I started playing it, and it worked immediately. It's the only game I've ever designed that worked. I was like, this is weird. It is actually works as is the first time. It was crazy. So that happened. But yeah, so basically, I've always liked writing. Writing has always been a core, central part of me. Like you talked about, I think storytelling has always been something that I've been incredibly passionate about, and why I didn't want to be considered like CEO of Atheris. I always used chief storyteller, and so I felt like integrating more story into our games and incorporating more stories through comic books, that we could do more, into basically more storytelling through different mediums, and then trying to integrate those mediums as much as possible. So we're trying to do more board games that integrate comics and graphic novels, so that you feel and can relate to the story when you're playing the game. And this is something that some other publishers have already kind of started doing a little bit. Deepwater Games owns a comic book imprint called Source Point Press, and they just released a big comic, for Gloomhaven, and they're doing other comics like that utilize board game universes. I know that they just made a board game for one of their comic, that started out as a comic called Franklin the Ghost, and then they made a board game adaptation of that. So I think that combining the multiple mediums, that I think all board gamers tend to kind of like comics and reading and similar things, and so I think they're close enough, that there's some overlap, and that they can also be used together to create more immersive story experiences.
I've always thought that comics could be a great method for tutorializing board games. Like, one of the big barriers for a lot of board games out there is the significant overhead of having to learn them. And
Yeah.
using kind of like an avatar, a proxy of the person who's actually having to face this challenge, learning the game as it goes with visual components that are entertaining and engaging. And there is a story element of, this proxy of people sitting down together learning this game, and by factor you are learning this game. I always thought that would be a fantastic way to go to tutorialize games.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that rule books are really hard to write.
Yeah, I just read one earlier. I'm not going to say what the game is, but whew, boy, I was like, man, this needed an editor and a graphic designer. Whew.
I won't write my own rules. I'm a writer. I won't write them. I don't think I do as well with technical book writing, but more than that, it's like I feel like I know so much about the games once, even the ones I haven't designed, just playing them over and over, the repetition. I'm like, I'm not the best person to write this rule book. I'm gonna forget something for sure. So I normally will hire rulebook editors that then, I have them come in and consult with me and the designer and make sure that everything lines up and makes sense. But yeah, it's super important to hire rulebook editors and, like you said, graphic designers. People underestimate how much graphic design matters. It, in a lot of ways, matters even more than art, in terms of legibility and ability to read through the rules and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's kind of crazy. It's incredibly difficult. Even the professional rulebook editors make mistakes. Obviously, we're all people. Rulebooks are super hard because, in writing in general, people decipher things in different ways. Written communication is very, very difficult, and word choice matters so much with everything. So I definitely think that there's a lot that can be improved with rulebooks. So hopefully the industry gets there at some point where they're a little easier to step into games. I know a lot of games are doing more of the tutorial model, where it's easier to jump in and then learn the rules as you go, which I think is a great strategy.
Well, we have talked about blankets. We've now talked about comics. I cannot let you go without at least asking, what are you doing on the board game end of things? Like, COVID is going on right now. You mentioned that retail for Ruins of Mars wasn't as high as you initially projected or expected for the game. So do you have any games that are coming up on the horizon? Have you signed anything new? Are you designing anything right at the moment?
I would love to start designing stuff. I haven't been in that arena as much as I like. But I have signed a few games. So I signed a smaller game by Don Riddle, the designer of Ruins of Mars, that he partnered with Stephen Eckman started the design process, and then incorporated Don a little bit later for one of our small box games that's going to be coming out. So I'm excited about signing that. Stephen's an excellent designer and friend, and obviously I've touted Don a lot with Ruins of Mars, and I've liked all of his games that he's ever showed me. So I definitely think that this one is going to be one that people really like. Like I said, it's a little bit smaller than Ruins of Mars, so I think that people who enjoy Ruins of Mars and want something quick in between are going to enjoy this, and there's going to be a lot of cool meeples, hopefully. So that's a thing. And then Julio Nazario and Matt Wolf designed a worker placement game that we recently signed, so we're really excited about that. And that's the first game that we want to kind of incorporate more storytelling into. So we're trying to, basically I'm working to create a comic or a graphic novel that fits within the universe of the game to incorporate more storytelling in it, create a more immersive story experience of that one.
Julio Nazario is on fire right now. That dude is designing he's probably designed 40 games since I last saw him at PAX Unplugged last year.
His mind definitely works a mile a minute. I met him at a smaller convention, Tantrum Con, and I would talk to him, and he had so many games. He showed me 3 at a time.
Right.
I'm like, he's like, what cell sheet do you want? I'm like, oh my God, there's so many options to choose from. But yeah, he designs really, really clever systems as well. I know that he has a lot of really cool games. That his Holly Festival game that recently came out is incredibly gorgeous. It's one of the prettiest games I've seen. So he's designed a lot of really cool stuff, and I think, like you said, I'm sure he has a lot signed that, in the back end that we're going to start just seeing them all pop up all at once. That's what happened with J.B. Howell and Mike Mahilsik. They started signing games, and they're local to me, so I knew that they were signing them, and then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, they just have 8 games now overnight. Yeah.
Well, last thing I want to ask you about, especially because you're in the blanket gig at this point, talk to me about your Swaddle game. I mean, I know you got a baby in the house, so you mastered the swaddling techniques. I know that was a big point of pride for me. I was like, no one is swaddling my baby better than me. So you got this down pat?
Unfortunately not. I'm not the best. My wife probably beats me in... Well, she's better than me in every regard. And if she ever listens to this, she'll appreciate that she knows she's better than me in any regard whatsoever. But yeah, she's probably was the better swaddler of the two of us. I only did it a few times, honestly. I work early in the morning, and so a lot of the times the late night stuff ends up going to her. I'm like, I'm sorry, I work at 6.
Well, who has to swaddle a baby when you live in Florida? I mean, that's an Alaska problem.
That's the other thing is we talked about this before. My house is incredibly hot all the time. It would probably actually be cooler most of the time in my house, especially before I literally just had to fix my AC because it was not working well. I was 25 years old. But it was so hot in my office that if I opened my windows in here, it was cooler. And Florida's 100 degrees, so that doesn't make sense.
That is murderous, and I would most assuredly die.
Sweating, and well, I had a few calls, honestly. So I think my first meeting with Julio, my fan was on and it was too loud, and I had to turn it off. And it was so hot, I was sweating the whole meeting that we were playing the game.
Must have been whoa, cool guy that I'm siding with here right now. All right, man. Well, as always, it is an absolute pleasure to talk with you. What is the name of the Kickstarter for the blankets? How can people find out more about this?
I haven't really currently named it anything.
What? I mean, you're killing my outro here, man.
I know. Killing it.
How am I supposed to be like Hot Ones, where I'm like, this camera, this camera, this camera? Tell the people what you got going on.
That's the best part of Hot Ones. I currently have it titled Board Game Blankets Stay Warm, My Friends.
Oh, okay.
I eventually plan on naming them, but I was trying to figure out if I want to make a separate but part of Atheris entity for the merchandise, and I haven't really figured out exactly what I'm gonna do yet. And I'll probably like wait until like the day before the Kickstarter, and then I'll figure it out.
Well, I'll tell you what, I will put a link down below in here if you're watching the video, or if you're listening to the podcast, it'll be in the description on the website, to where you can find out more about Atheris Entertainment and all of their blanket enterprises. Thanks again for coming on to the show, Andrew.
Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this video, we have all kinds of other reviews, interviews, and recommendations via writing, podcasts, and video here on our channel and website, cardboardherald.com. Our content is audience supported, so if you want to show your support, please visit our Patreon. Thank you so much for watching. This has been the Cardboard Herald.